my name is Michelle Embree, and I'm going to talk about tarot cards just a little bit, and especially in particular, a workshop on tarot spreads.
Good morning, Michelle. So one of the big questions I get at the rock shop is whether or not people can buy their own tarot cards. What's your thinking about that?
Oh, you can absolutely buy your own deck of tarot cards. I'm not even sure where that folklore comes from exactly. At the baseline of tarot cards, you're looking at symbols that relate to things that go on in everyone's psychology. Absolutely everyone can benefit from looking at and delving into the symbols and the stories associated with tarot cards. So please feel free to buy your own deck in the same way that you would buy your own book.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about how tarot cards originated. Do you know any of the history of tarot cards?
Well, we can take it pretty far back, but in the end, I go with the teachings of Rachel Pollack on this one. Nobody really knows for sure exactly where it began. We don't know if it began as a divination tool and turned into a table game, if it began as a table game and turned into a divination game. Nobody's really entirely sure, but we can take it back several centuries and we can find it in both Christian and Judean mysticism.
Great. So do you have a favorite type of deck?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't necessarily have a favorite type of deck, but one of the classic decks that are very popular in America and around the world, and one that I think most people are familiar with, is the Rider-Waite deck, which I'll show you some cards from this deck. This was designed by Pamela Coleman Smith, was the name of the artist, under the teachings of a man named Smith. So this is her artwork that I think really shows some of the best symbolism in tarot and the most easy to understand. I think it's a great deck to begin with.
Thank you. I have a lot of customers who ask if they can have more than one deck of tarot cards.
It's highly recommended, and especially a couple of different decks. I definitely read with 2 decks anytime I'm reading cards for our clients. I always have at least 2 decks. I have gone up to as many as 5 during one reading, so I will invite many decks into reading. So I think it's most people like to collect decks anyway. Once they really get the tarot bug, they like to have several decks anyway. 2 is highly recommended.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about the care and feeding of your deck. How do you store your deck?
I wrap mine in scarves. I don't necessarily, this is Susan's scarf for her card deck. It's silk. So you can definitely use silk. Is highly recommended by most people. I have some scarves that they go back in time for me, so they remind me of certain things, and I like to use those. You can wrap them up in scarves. You can put them in a box. To cleanse them or clear them, you put your crystals on them and do them that way. I like to use a little sage smudge on mine. And not necessarily that often. Tarot cards are not necessarily particularly more sticky than anything else. You might have sticky energetically, I mean. So about once a month. Sometimes also I like to leave them on a table in the full moon if I'm by a window where I can get that.
So
Excellent.
Some people think that it's really important to protect your deck with either silk, leather, and not leave the spread out so that it doesn't attract anything unwanted. Tell us your thinking about that and how you handle that.
All right. Well, I come from a bit of a different place on that. My fundamental belief system means that I don't actually believe in sacred objects. Now, for people who do, then your cards are probably going to be sacred to you, in which case you'll want to keep them wrapped and covered all of the time. If you are looking for a way to use the tarot cards and not feel like you're engaging a religious or a haunted object in any way, my take on the cards is probably for you. I really see them as a tool, and I really do feel close to myself spiritually when I'm using the cards, but I always view them as just essentially a deck of cards, like any other deck of cards. So for me, and I love the images on the cards, and I read cards almost all day, so I actually have my cards out and open all the time. For some people, however, they feel very sensitive towards it, or just sensitive towards it, and feel like a portal is opened by having the cards out, in which case then you're going to want to wrap them or box them, or at least protect them with a crystal or another object that you find sentimental, or that you find imbues, maybe something your grandmother owned or something like that, that makes you feel comforted.
Excellent. Thank you. Tell us, when you're finished with a deck, what do you do with the deck that you don't want anymore?
What do you do with a deck you don't want anymore? Now, for me, I'm pretty sentimental about my decks, so you'll find that my sock drawer has a bunch of them tied and wrapped and put away in the bottom. I do occasionally, since I do read for clients professionally, I do go through a number of decks. So I do have decks that I used to give cards away also. For me, at times I'll say, oh, you need this card, or I'll send them as a gift. That's something that can definitely be done. If you're wild and you really want to you really feel like you have a lot of last year's energy on your deck, I can't imagine anything more fun than sending them off in a nice full moon bonfire. But I've never done that myself.
Can you throw your deck away?
I don't know why you'd want to, but sure. It's not a sacred object, in my opinion, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. You should give it away card by card, or burn it up. Like I said, once again, what a fun time.
Thank you.
All right, for those of you looking to get started reading tarot, I have 2 books that I would recommend right off the top of my head. One is Kitchen Table Tarot by Melissa Sinova, and the other is 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. I think those are 2 great books to start with, because for one thing, you can sit down and read both of those books just straight through. You can use them as a guide, but they're also great to lie back on the couch and read them, which lets you in on the real secret of beginning reading tarot, is that it is a story about human life. And so when you just engage the story as having to do with a human life that anyone would lead, it allows you to understand the cards pretty readily and pretty quickly. Paul Foster Case said that the tarot is a book disguised as a deck of cards. So that's how you can enter the story, is by reading it actually as a book. Another suggestion that I would have is, when you first begin, I wouldn't bother, this is personal, other people would have a different opinion, but I wouldn't bother with reversals. I would go ahead and read all of the cards as if they were upright. And this way you start getting an understanding of how the cards dialogue and interact with each other. And then later on, when you want to introduce reversals, it'll just be an indication that you're on the right track. That would be one of the main things. That makes it much simpler from the beginning. The other thing I would say is this, is when you get your deck, invite your friends over and start reading their cards for fun, and look things up in your book. Don't feel like you need to memorize and know things. Reach out to people. There's several things going on here. For one thing, it'll help you with your cards. As you laugh with your friends and tell stories, the more stories you have about your cards, the better you're going to read them along the way. That's the key, is collecting the stories that go with the cards. So you can do that with your friends. On the other hand, reaching out to people, we live in a somewhat disconnected world, despite all of our technology and despite all of our better thinking. We actually are living in quite a lonely world, and people have problems that they never ever talk about. I think you'd be surprised at what's really going on in the people around you in their lives. So when you pull them in to ask them to give a card reading, you're offering to give attention to their story. And that in itself is a way of helping people and making the world a better place. So you don't need to be a tarot card reader with a lot of experience and a lot of memorized things under your belt. If you are just an open person with your little book, you can do a lot of good in the world.
So Michelle, I find the spreads very complicated. Do I have to stick with the spreads like they show, or can I just sort of ad-lib it?
Well, one of the best ways, I think, are a couple of short spreads that are really easy, is the 3-card spread, which can be past, present, and future. Or it can also be self, circumstance, and challenge. And that's a real simple spread to get you started. You can tell a lot from just doing 3 cards in either one of those manners.
So Michelle, what happens if I'm doing a reading and I pull a really frightening card like the devil card. What do I do about that?
There are a couple of cards that can look scary in the tarot until you get used to them, and one of them is certainly the devil. We have a lot of baggage with the devil also. So let's just dispel a little bit of that first. The devil in the tarot deck has to deal with anything that is of the earth. So it's food, it's a beer, it's money, it's being attracted to someone, it's any of those things, anything that really has to do with the body rather than the spirit. So that isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can be quite a good thing. Another practitioner, Rachel Pollack, I bring her up a lot, said that she was taking clients from another practitioner, and she turned over the devil and thought, oh, well, what am I going to say to this person about that? And the client, who was accustomed to tarot cards, said, yay, that means I'm going to party all weekend. So that's what the devil meant. Right.
Nice slant.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what the devil meant. It meant that she was going to have maybe a few beers and some barbecue, maybe go dancing. To her, it was a very fun card. At other points in time, we may look also at anything. The devil may also be obsessions and things that bind us. And so that's just, once again, it's just part of regular human life. And it doesn't mean that anything scary or evil has now entered your life. That's not what's happening.
So what happens if I'm doing a reading for someone who has a health issue or is asking about someone who has a health issue and the death card comes up? How do I handle that?
Well, the death card, that's difficult. For one thing, health readings, I think, are very difficult to do. And we should always do them with the caveat that we are asking a deck of cards, and that's where we're starting from with this, and that everyone needs to listen to their doctor and take all the best precautions they know for their own health before really engaging a health reading, as if we can determine what someone should do from a deck of cards. It's not a very responsible place to come from. If, however, you do get the death card for someone who is quite ill, what I would suggest is discussing the many, many transformations that come through lifetimes. And they come through maybe not our best moments, maybe times when we do have illness, maybe times when we do have hardship. And what happens is we transform and we rebirth in these amazing, amazing ways. The death card itself just really means that we're going through major transition. That at the heart of it, that's what it means. You can change something, like the Two of Discs is a card that means you change something, like you got a new pair of shoes, you paint the bathroom, you got a new car. Those are all things that are changing, but they're not necessarily deep changes. And this is the example I use always with the death card, is somebody who wakes up one day and says, wow, I'm a pathological liar. I should change. That's a death level change. That's a change in the character of who a person is. So if you are getting the death card, look at what the major changes that are undergoing for the person, that the seeker in that case. What are the major changes in personality, in character, maybe even in physical form?
So Michelle, I know we had one 6-week workshop for learning how to read the tarot cards. So could you tell a little bit about what happens in that workshop? And then I know we were going to do a couple of 2-hour workshops, and maybe you could say something about those. So why don't you start with the 6-week course? Tell me what happens in that.
All right. I love the 6-week course. We had an excellent group here when we did it last time. This is gets you started in the best possible way. We do go through the entire deck. We start with the major arcana and we work into the smaller cards. And so, because you want to see how those are reflected in each other. Once you get a real grasp for the major arcana, the minor arcana comes a bit more easily. So what we do in this group is we keep a journal on the cards as we're picking them during the week, and we're telling our stories about each card. It helps you learn each card because the cards are about stories. So the more stories you have, the more you know about the cards. As we progress, you get your confidence in reading. Every time I do this workshop, people leave able to read cards in a way that they feel satisfied, and most people seem to continue on. I get emails constantly from people telling me how much they learned and how much they're carrying it on through their life. The tarot really can be a tool that helps you psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, socially throughout the course of your everyday life. It is a tool that you can introduce into everyday activities and get something great from it. And in the 6-week class, you really learn how to do that. And hopefully you learn to know yourself a little bit better than you did before.
Thank you. But what if I'm not ready to commit to a 6-week class and the money and the time? Do you have something that's like 2 hours maybe?
We do. I will be doing a class on tarot spreads. In this 2-hour workshop, I will show you 2 of the major spreads, the long spreads that you can do that get you the best information. And I will show you a series of shorter spreads that will also glean much information for you. Now, while there's a lot of fancy spreads out there, these are the basics. These are the foundational spreads and how to ask questions to these spreads that will get you great results right away on what you're hoping for with the tarot. And you don't need to know how to read a tarot deck to show up to the spreads course, because we will go through that. It is a foundational course in doing any tarot work at all.